On this show, we feature my very special guest, Chris Herren, as Faust. Chris Herren as Faust represented the United States of America at the 2021 FISM North American Championships, competing as one of the top 6 parlor magicians on the continent. His performances have won him 4 international competition awards, which include the 2018 and 2019 PCAM, Pacific Coast Association of Magicians, First Place Gold Medal Award for Parlor Magic. Faust has made acclaimed performances on the world-famous Magic Castle Hollywood virtual show, Jeff McBride's Vegas Wonderground, Ron Saylor's Celebrities of Magic, Scott Nary's Booby Trap LA, Washington Magic, and the Magic and Meaning Conference in Las Vegas. Chris is a regular performer on the international network Asian Culture Television. He has also filmed the opening sequence for America's Got Talent Season 15 and appeared on NBC's Today Show with Lester Holt. And welcome everybody to Magical People. This week we have my very special guest, Chris Herren as Faust. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good, Dr. Likey. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to get into a great conversation with you. It's always a good conversation with you. But, oh, by the way, Happy New Year, Dr. Likey.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. I have to say that from the very first time I saw you perform, and I think that was actually thanks to Anthony Darkstone and the Society of American Magicians International Assembly, of which we're members, that I got to see you perform. I believe that's so. And I have to tell you, very few performers for me have touched off that magical, whimsical, almost childlike perspective that I believe all of us have. Sometimes we forget. And really, I'm not just trying to say nice things. I really mean this. You've bridged the gap between theater and real magic with your character, Faust.
Well, thank you so much. That's the thing. I didn't plan it to be that way, and I don't think that we do. I think the journey of magic begins with what do I see magic as, or how do I see myself expressing magic? And I think Eugene Berger had once said, "What do you want your magic to be?" And that always resonated to me. And for years, Dr. Likey, I never knew what it was. And I guess, through my life experience, it kind of veered towards theater and to be able to tell a story, and, an authentic story that expressed my, how I felt and how I viewed the world. So I wouldn't say that I planned it that way, but I knew that that was a format that I needed to use to bring my story and bring my expression across.
Awesome. When I was researching you, and I research a little bit of my guests, I basically go to their website and look at stuff that grabs me. And what grabbed me was the fact that you wrote a thesis creating a magical experience, and it's archived at the Magic Circle Library in London, England. And I have a funny feeling that many people, both magicians and performers and regular people or lay people alike, may be fascinated by that journey, by that story. Did you wish to share that with us?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think that was a question that I always asked. I study under Jeff McBride, and that was the one thing that I explored and studied with him, as this deeper understanding of magic, or what we are supposed to be doing on stage. And through that study, I kind of developed this thesis that surrounds the relationship between the performer and the audience. And I think together, the relationship and the experience between performer and audience creates a magical experience, because no magical experience would exist if it was just a performer performing for himself, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I looked deep into that, and basically the thesis really is establishing this thing we call magical experience, this emotional connection between what's going on up here on stage and what the audience is experiencing out there. And I kind of came up with a formula. And once again, I the idea is not completely authentic, but it jumps on what Jeff McBride had really taught and embedded in me, was that magic is a gift to be given. And I took that concept and I said, well, if magic is a gift to be given to the audience, then if the audience receives that gift, they also give back to the performer. And this sort of circle of giving and receiving between the audience, this connection, and this sort of connection to what's going on and how they perceive it, it begins to create something more than just tricks. And so that was something that I was exploring. But I also knew, Dr. Likey, that have you ever received a gift where you didn't want to receive it, or because it was coming from someone?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
so I discussed that too. So what is what do you do in those circumstances? Well, I think it's a huge responsibility for the magician to establish that relationship where the audience does receive this sort of magical experience from you. And I go really in depth. And a lot of what I talk about is being able to use your gestures and your movements to communicate to the audience that what I'm performing here is for you. And I do that motion a lot, is to, because the human the human being, before language was even developed, or spoken language was developed, they had already did nonverbal communication or pantomime. And so everyone as a human being understands the movement and communication between something like this, me performing here and then bringing it over here. It says something. And so,
Absolutely.
and I contribute all these movement and gestures to being able to communicate with the audience that this is for you. This is a gift to you. And if I give something to you, perhaps you might give something back. And this circle that creates a magical experience is developed. So it's more theory, but I think it's practical to look at magic as more than just tricks.
Absolutely. There is a magic, if you will, a real magic that occurs between the performer or the magician, whoever happens to be presenting or giving or sharing, if you will, and the
Yeah.
audience. It's a constant, if it's done right, energetic flow. And I'm
Yes.
all about theatrics. I'm all about, because my background, shortly before I went on stage formally as a magician, I was trained by a person who ran a theater company, and he was a taskmaster, but he knew what he was doing, from movement and walking on stage. My wife then at the time, he'd mock her. He'd go, "No, don't walk like this. Walk like this." And there was an energy and a lightness about it. And I hope that I've still maintained that kind of movement, esoteric movement, if you will,
Yeah.
um, and that non-physical communication, which you have captured so well. My wife recently remarked about you, because she's crazy about you.
Thank you.
She loves what you do. She loves how you do it. We've seen you a number of times in your stage act, and I think at magic meetings. And what was so cool is she said she's never, I want to say participate. I mean, she was watching, but she got drawn in. She said, you gestured, you did something, and it made her move towards the screen. And she said, no other performer has ever done that for her before.
Thank you. And that's what my thesis really is I don't know everything, and I guess we're all students of this art form, and I'm a student of pantomime as well. And I think that was my whole intention, is that even if we don't know that we're doing it, we are communicating. And magic is just that. It's this communication between you and the audience. And yes, I think with studying under Jeff and studying pantomime, and also you understand, Dr. Likey, that movement is so important. And if you really become aware of it, you realize how powerful it can be. And then combine that with magic and, speaking, it becomes this very powerful instrument. And so I'm glad that your wife, responded in that way, because I don't often get to hear it. But yeah, it's the intention. Although I'm not the magician where I have you pick a card or pick a number, I do think that interaction can still exist if the pantomime is deliberate and is intended to communicate. And so the people will respond even though you're not, doing an interactive, so-called interactive piece. But
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. Um, I love the fact, and again, I'm going to speak in terms of metaphysics and esoteria because that's my
yes,
professional background.
yes.
In addition to performance magic, I studied that for many years. My degrees are in metaphysics. Um, it's the non-physical, the world that's not there that people do respond to, whether they realize it or not.
Yes.
And in all humbleness, I believe that you're a master of it. I mean, that's quite
Oh, thank
the word. But I too was drawn in, and I have to speak in those terms that there's a mysticism about. They're going to see just before we come to air this a brief few second video of your silk scarf, your silk handkerchief, and that in itself, there's a flowing of energy and a presenting and a this and a that, and um, some have it and some don't. um, it can be taught mechanically, but
you.
you really have it, Chris. You have
Oh,
that
thank
certain something that adds, that puts you, with all due respect, steps, not ahead, but, and I hate to say above, but maybe steps away from other performers.
thank you.
Um, I mean, we've all enjoyed, as performers, as magicians, seeing people come out, both at the Magic Castle and on television, with those big illusions. And there's something wonderfully choreographed in those big illusions. Hopefully, there's song, there's dance, and
Yes.
there's a little bit of a dance with the physical illusions, which accomplish the magic in the end. But do those physical, those boxes, if you will, which we refer to as boxes, do they really accomplish the magic, or is it the performer?
Yeah, that is absolutely something that I've explored and tried to understand. I think beginning the journey of magic, Dr. Leggy, I had a different perception of how I wanted to present magic. And I was really focused on the tricks, and I think every magician has a room full of magic, and more than what they can really use. And then through time, everything is fitted in this black box. For me, it's just shaved down. And what Jeff McBride had taught me was is that it's not about the tricks, it's your relationship with the tricks, that, or the effects, whatever you want to call them, and being able to find meaning in what you're doing. If it could be the most simplest, and I love taking this most simplest trick, like the knots off silk, that everyone knows, and but trying to find relevancy with me and this thing. How can I, create a relationship with it where it really means something than just me pulling silks off? But that in itself was a journey. But that is why it took so long for me, Dr. Likey, to develop Faust. And I admit, Faust was, it just wasn't born. I had went one direction in a really bizarre, sort of strange, spooky feel and aesthetic, and it just wasn't vibing. The character wanted to become more whimsical. And it took me almost 3 years to really figure out what sort of voice I wanted to give this and what sort of tricks and how to move with those tricks was a huge exploration. And I think after 3 years, Dr. Like, I really only had a struggling of 15 minutes of material with Faust. And it was so frustrating, but I was patient with it. And another thing, you mentioned the movement. That in itself, for me, I knew I couldn't do that alone. I needed mentors with Jeff McBride and also Dan Griffiths, who was a teacher in pantomime who studied under Marcel Marceau, gave me so many valuable nuggets in terms of movement, things outside of magic to really hone how do I express a feeling. And I think that's important to get
Yes.
good teachers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Somebody once said, and I don't know who it is, somebody once said everybody needs a mentor. If you're lucky enough to have more than one mentor as you grow, that's even better. I believe that there's this saying that was very popular when I arrived at the west coast of Canada: when the student is ready, the mentor, the teacher, the guru appears. And
Yes.
I really believe that there certainly is something to that.
Yeah.
Yet another thing that I admire about you, Chris, is obviously we've probably performed for many different people at many different venues. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, almost to, I guess, to mid 30s, I was still living in the central part of Canada. I noticed that the younger we were, the more props we had.
Yes.
And it's almost as if we depended on these props that we had to. I know I hid behind magic props or my guitar. I'm also
Yeah.
a musician. And so I felt very comfortable incorporating music, hiding behind my guitar and hiding behind a dove cage or a mismade lady. I've worked with all the huge illusions as well. And all the we'll say older fellows, the older magicians that were part of our shows when we went out to do hospitals and stuff, um, they just had a few props.
Yes.
Yet they could do a half-hour show or 20-minute show just with the linking rings and maybe sponge rabbits. And me, I
Yes.
had like 10 different props or more and effects, and I'm schlepping on my chair suspension, for example, and other
Yeah.
things, and my bow sawing. And this one magician who was in his 70s or 80s, he comes out with nothing. He just has a briefcase. And I'm thinking, I'm getting nervous for him because I'm not getting that concept at that point. I'm thinking,
Yes.
holy cow, we're doing this large venue. What's going to occur here? And
Right.
he had it. But then the question arose as time went on for me: will it take time for me as a person to evolve into that? And
Right.
yet you're relatively young, with all due respect, and
Thank
and you seem to have accomplished that. You don't need massive props, many props to convey messages, to create magic on stage. And I think that's amazing. I really admire that.
Thank you, Dr. Likey. I think we all go through that journey, right? I used to do children's magic as a young adult in my teens, and I had everything. I had the sword through head, and um, as I got older, I had the low standard floating table, and you name it, I had it, and I relied on props. I loved apparatus magic, by the way, and these are things that I just went through it. You just did it. But then later on, what really got me? It was, I think when I got older, I really wanted to find a voice. What did I want to say? And there weren't too many tricks that really, or props that really felt right for this direction that I was going to. And Faust was really originally wasn't a magical character that I wanted to develop. It was a story, and everyone knows the old story of Faust, where he sells his soul to the devil, and I think it was written in the 16th century, somewhere around then. And it's a very classic piece of literature. But when I had read it, I looked at it in terms of his emotional experience. And I, at the time when I read it, I was going through cancer, and and I think I understood this sort of desperation that he was going through, and that attracted me to this character. And eventually, I realized I knew I couldn't write well, but I loved magic, and I thought to myself, maybe I can create a character where I can implement this character Faust and express this vulnerability, this desperation. I didn't know if I could do it, but that's how Faust kind of began. And one of the first pieces of magic that I ever started working on as Faust was the broken music box. And I think people will recognize that as a very classical piece where a doll rises up and down in your hand, and you know, and I put my own variation and turns to it. But I thought that that piece, that magical piece, had meaning in the character, and I knew that that was there to stay.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
think there's an irony, isn't there? And I don't necessarily mean this as a joke, but you found your voice in a mime character.
Yes, yes. It is ironic, you know, and the thing about mime, I had always loved pantomime. Marcel Marceau, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton. I've always been attracted to these characters of the past. But for some reason, even though they didn't talk, their language, their body language really brought out emotion, and I connected with that, especially when I seen Marcel Marceau. Boy, I tell you, Dr. Leahy, I had always laughed through Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, but when Marceau performed, I was moved. And I said to myself, if I ever were to learn this art, I want to move people in the way he did. And so I strive to do that with Faust. He had Bip, I have Faust, and you know, I'll never become as great as good as he is, but you know, my his influence on me is so strong because it's so poetic and yet tragic. And I think I gravitated towards that sort of character where there's vulnerability, and going through cancer, circling back, I found vulnerability, and I think I was able to open up more and really find my voice in this silent character, ironically enough. But
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
it spoke very loud for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. You bring so much joy, Chris, to so many people. And what I want to do is I want to start to wrap up
Yep.
really as a means of teasing other people. You know, that old expression, leave them wanting more. And
Yes.
I'm excited to pursue this line of metaphysics and esoteria in
Yeah.
performance art a little bit more with you if you're willing to come back sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That would be fabulous. How can people get in touch with you?
They get I'm on social media, so Facebook as Chris Herren as Faust. Also Instagram, I'm fairly active, Chris Herren as Faust. And then you can always look on my website and contact me through there. It's www.chrisherrenmagic.com. And I respond and I'm very accessible. So please reach out and say hello.
Awesome. What a pleasure and an honor I want to say to play with you because really
Yes.
there's a certain joy for me, I believe for you as well, in performing, in giving, in sharing. That's a new word I learned a few years ago from a very spiritual person that I know. He writes poetry as well.
Yeah.
And he said, rather than saying, I'm going to present this to you or I'm going to give this to you, how about share?
Yes,
And that really resonated for me, and it probably resonates for you because
absolutely.
we're sharing an art.
Yes. Dr. Liga, I think you summed it up best. In my thesis, the very first thing that we started talking about, I had always tried to use those terms, giving and sharing magic. And that's how I see magic. It's meant to be given as a gift to people.
Beautiful, beautiful. You're a gift, Chris.
Thank
And
you.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And I also want to thank all of you out there who joined us. I know you got a lot out of this today.
Abs-
Check out Chris Herren. Check him out at the Magic Castle and wherever he's performing, perhaps online as well. We'll see you all again really soon.